Lord, and I just pray that you would be with all of us today, that you would open our hearts and our minds to hear what you would have us to hear, Lord. I pray that you would speak through me and let it not be my words, but let it be your words, Lord. I just pray that the meditations of all of our minds and the words of our mouth will be pleasing unto you, Lord. In your name, amen. So I want us to start by putting ourselves in this story. I want us, if you'll humor me, just to close our eyes and to imagine that you are Peter in this story. And think about all that must be going on in Peter's mind. Just a few days prior, you had been following this teacher, you had been wanting to do everything that he said, you've been serving him, but when things got tough, you kind of didn't stick out with it. When things got tough, when he was being led away to be killed, you went into hiding. You went away and you denied him. You're sitting there, you're smelling this fire, you're keeping warm, and someone's like, hey, aren't you a follower of Jesus? Don't you know him? And immediately, you're done serving him, you're ready just to save your own skin. You didn't want to end up like him, so you're like, no, I don't know him. But then now here we are, a couple days later, you've seen that he's been risen from the dead, he's back, and you and your buds are out fishing, you're just doing what you're used to doing, and then you're fishing and you don't catch anything. And finally there's a stranger who comes, and the stranger's like, put it on the other side of the boat. So at first you're like, this seems familiar. Something about this feels like I should trust this person. So you do that, and immediately you and your friends catch fish, and you realize this is Jesus. He's back to see us again. He's back. So you're Peter. You put your clothes back on. You jump in the water. You rush to him, and you see that he started a fire, that he is cooking fish for you, and you smell that fire, and you're brought back to that moment, the last time you were around a fire, when you were around this fire and you denied him, and you think of that. But yet here Jesus is, alive and in the flesh, and he's asking you to have breakfast with him. And not only has he made you breakfast, but he's asking you to share your catch with him. He's asking you to do that. And then after you've eaten, you're walking with Jesus, and he's asking you, do you love me? And of course, at first you're like, yeah, of course. You're back. I'm ready to serve you. I'm ready to do whatever you want me to do. Yes, I love you. But he asks you again, do you love me? Like, yes, I do. I get this. And he's like, do you love me? And that's when it hits you. Jesus isn't just asking if you love him, but he's reminding you of what you did. He's reminding you of that denial, but he's also forgiving you. He's saying, your story is not over yet. If you accept this, your story is not over yet. I still have more work for you to do. And he's transforming those 3 times and commissioning and challenging him to feed and care for his sheep. So I think there are many things, if you did close your eyes, you can open them now, but there are many things we can learn from this passage. And today I mostly want us to focus on that Jesus is calling us towards forgiveness and reconciliation with him, and then is commissioning us to do his work here as the kingdom is unfolding. But first, before we go into all of that, I want us to think about the fact of something we've talked about many times, and that's that Jesus doesn't need us. Jesus chooses to work with us, and he loves us, but he doesn't need us. Scholar and theologian N.T. Wright points out in this passage that it shows this by showing that when they get to the shore, Jesus was already cooking them breakfast. Jesus already had a fish there, but yet he invites them to share their catch. He didn't need them to try to catch all the fish, but he invited them to be a part of that. And he invites us all the time to be a part of his kingdom plan. Jesus is already here working in Knox County. Every place we go, Jesus is already there, but he's inviting us to be a part of that. He's inviting us to be shepherds, evangelists, apostles, teachers, prophets, because he is the good shepherd and he wants us to join him. So I love that John's gospel ends with this commissioning, that there's so many ways John could have ended his gospel. He could have just been like, and Jesus was raised from the dead, now you fill in the blank. Or, and Jesus was raised from the dead, now let's celebrate and that's it. But he ends it with this conversation. He ends it with this commissioning to Peter. This is Peter's call to care for his sheep. And if we claim to love and follow him, then we are also given a call that we must take very seriously. I find this reminds me of a passage in the Gospel of Mark when Jesus is telling us that if we teach children and if we lead them astray, it would be better for us to tie a millstone around our neck and drown. And I know that sounds pretty extreme, pretty serious, but I think sometimes when we're reading passages of Scripture, when we get to moments like this, we sort of just quickly read past it because it makes us feel uncomfortable. Or we're like, well, this sounds weird. I'm just going to keep going, and maybe it'll sound better after that. But I think this is a point that this is something we need to take seriously. The call that Jesus gives us, we need to take seriously. And we need to take seriously this thing to not lead young believers and children astray. I mean, have you guys seen a millstone before? Have you thought about this? I think there's one on the square, and I know there's one in the New Testament garden at the Faith Lutheran Church here in town. These are big things. Imagine taking that, tying it around your neck, and jumping in the lake at Foundation Park. Like, that's not an enjoyable thing, and it's probably not going to work out well for you. But it's just, yeah. It's showing how much of a big deal it is. It's showing that this is a catastrophic thing, that Jesus wants to know how important it is and how seriously we need to take our calls. But if we're being honest, Peter's struggle is one that so many of us struggle with. I think one of the reasons why Peter is so vocal and we know so much about Peter is because we can relate to him. We get the struggle that he has. This, especially in today's day and age, this struggle to live as a Christian and to even go by the label Christian in this post-Christian world, especially in a world where this term Christian has gained so many negative connotations. I mean, I'm sure we can all think of something where we've seen someone who claims to be a Christian but is living out something completely different than the radical life that Jesus talks about. Just to name a few, the word Christian has been labeled with sexism and racism and bigotry and hypocrisy, and that's not what Jesus is about. But so often I think our struggle is that because it's been attached with this, we just want to throw away the term Christian. We don't want to go by that. It can be so easy just to not really want to talk about that, which is so sad because this label that's supposed to mean little Christ, this label that's supposed to define us. I mean, there's even a song that says, "Oh no, we are Christians by our love." That's not what people know us by. That's not what people know this term Christian by anymore. And in fact, it's something that I've even struggled with since high school, this idea of answering the question, aren't you a follower of Jesus? Aren't you a Christian? Like, I know what I believe, but I don't know if I always want to talk about it. I don't want to make people think I'm trying to shove my beliefs down their throat or anything like that. But just because there are negative connotations doesn't mean we shouldn't go by this name. When I was in high school, I had the privilege to work at a gas station, which was a very eye-opening experience for me for many, many different reasons. But one thing that I learned very early on when I was there is I had a better understanding of how a lot of people perceive Christians. I had a good understanding of just what they thought, especially because when I was growing up, both my parents were pastors. And so immediately when my coworkers and people that I would interact with there would find that out, they started to treat me different. They started to assume that I would either be really, really rebellious or I would be a holier-than-thou person. And they had they expected one of these two extremes, but either way, no matter which extreme that they expected me to fall under, they also assumed that I'd be hypocritical and judgmental simply based on the fact of my parents' vocation and that I claimed to be a Christian, that I was someone who was claiming to be this term that they had all these misconceptions about. So this revelation, it challenged me to prove them wrong. It challenged me to show that I was a normal person that they could relate to, that I too, even though I was a pastor's kid and I was a Christian, that I wanted to break down these misconceptions. I didn't want people to see that Christians are all the wrong things that they do, but I wanted them to see that they're loving individuals, that they're real and they sometimes make mistakes, and I wanted them to not see the misconceptions of Christians, but I wanted them to see Jesus through me. And it's that being a follower of Christ is not about being closed off or narrow-minded, but it's about being a person of this radical, life-changing love. But even with this goal, as I'm sure we can all relate, I still sometimes mess up. I still sometimes worried about how my actions would affect their perceptions. Even now, there are certain situations that I struggle to state that I'm a Christian or even to state that I work for a church. Sometimes I'd rather just say, oh, I'm a youth director, and leave it at that and let them fill in the blank. But I challenge that because I don't want them to see those misconceptions. I want them to see through my life, but I'm finding that I still need to be real about who I am as well. And sometimes it's even a temptation when I'm going out to eat not to mention that I'm a Christian, because I've found At one point, I was a server, and I learned that many servers don't really get excited when Christians come to eat. They feel that Christians are sometimes rude and the worst tippers. So immediately I'm like on my guard. I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want them to think wrongly of me, instead of redeeming that word. But God has been challenging me daily and is still challenging me to live a life that shows people who aren't Christians or aren't yet Christians what serving God really means and looks like. I'm daily being reminded that we are called to be people who don't just throw away this label just because it has so many negative things to it, but people who renew it and redeem it. But, I still struggle. We also struggle with that. I still struggle with people-pleasing. In fact, it reminds me of my college years, which many of you know wasn't that long ago. I just graduated last May. But during a couple years in college, I lived with a wonderful group of guys who a lot of them happened to not be Christian. Not only were they not Christian, though, but they had been very burnt by churches, and it was honestly a surprise to me that they had chose to come to a Christian school. And so because of that, it was my first inclination to not really want to talk about my faith. I mean, they knew that I was a ministry major, but besides that, I just wanted to keep our things private so that I wouldn't offend them. I was afraid that if I talked about my faith, if I was vocal, I would offend them. But over time, because I wouldn't talk about them, but they knew I was a ministry major, whenever I would mess up, as we all do, and whenever I would make dumb college decisions, they would always make some sarcastic comment. They would always say something like, "Oh, ministry majors, you say one thing in class, but you're completely different." And over time, I realized, wow, this isn't a good perception. Not only do they have a bad perception of Christians, but now they're getting a bad perception of ministry majors who can't even talk about their faith outside of the classroom. And so over time, as I started to grow closer to these guys, as I started to get to know them more, I realized that the more that I lived out my faith, the more that I was open and honest and authentic about what I believed and actually lived that out with them, the more they respected me and the more they wanted to talk with me about their issues, the more they came to me with their problems, because they knew that I wasn't just going to sit there and judge them. They knew that I wasn't just like all the other Christians they had met, but that they knew that they could see Jesus' love through me. Now, because of this, because of my honesty, I was able to share the gospel with them. I was able to be real with them. But does that mean they're all committed followers of Christ right now? No. Unfortunately, talking about my faith, sharing my faith, it's not that easy. It doesn't always change someone overnight. But I know that I was able to plant seeds in them. I know that I was able to show them and redeem this word Christian for them and show them that not all Christians are like what they've experienced. Not all Christians are judgmental or hypocritical, and do sometimes mess up and are normal people too. So I'm daily having to answer this question and daily taking up this challenge to feed the sheep and figure out just exactly what that looks like in today's day and age. So I want us to go back to this moment of Peter and Jesus being reconciled. Jesus is commissioning Peter. And then I think it's really important to note how Peter responds to this powerful moment of reconciliation. Because you would think at this point, he had already denied him, he had seen him die, he had seen him come back, he would just be like, yeah, I'm ready, send me, tell me where to go, tell me what to do. But instead of this, he points to one of Jesus' other disciples, and he asks, what about him? I think this is so powerful to look at because I think so many times we get caught up in this too. That, Peter right here is present with Jesus. He's physically walking and talking with him, something that so many of us wish we could do, and yet he isn't fully present. His mind is over there. He's looking at John, and he's asking, what about him? What about his path? I mean, how many of us get caught up in that? How many of us think to ourselves, oh, I would be a better Christian if I was like so-and-so because they pray so much better than me. Or I would be a better person if I was like that person because they serve so much better than me. But Jesus gives an answer to Peter that I think he would give to all of us that I think we really need to hear. What is that to you? What is that to you? Peter didn't accept this challenge. He got caught up in this act of comparing himself. He got caught up in this act of thinking, oh, that person's better than me. If I was like that person, then I would be good. Then I could do this call. But the good news is that we are all given a challenge. We are all given a call, and God is equipping us in different ways. He's not calling us all to be the same. He's not calling us to be exactly like someone else, or even to compare and wish that we were someone else. The only person that we should wish we were like is Jesus Christ himself. Jesus puts Peter in his place and wants to put us in our place by telling us not to worry about the other people, but to focus on the calling that I have given you. So yes, we need each other. I'm not saying it's all about me and just me and no one but me. We need each other. Salvation is about all of us. It's about the whole cosmos. It's so much more than just an individual thing like we've talked about. But we don't need each other in the comparison sort of way. Because if we're being real, there is not a person in this room that is better than another person. Sure, we all have different backgrounds. We all have different upbringings. Some of us might make more than others. We all have different gifts and personalities. But we are all here created equally in the image of God. And if we've accepted this forgiveness, we are also not only in the image of God, but we are adopted children of the King. And how awesome is that? Think about that. We don't need to compare ourselves to other people because God knows each and every one of us. He knows the number of hairs on our heads, and he knows what we've done. He knows what we've been through, and he loves us so much and wants us to receive that forgiveness and wants us to be his adopted children. So now I want to jump back to our reading in 1 Peter. I thought putting 1 Peter coupled with John 21 is a great thing to put together because this now is the same apostle. This is Peter going and he's doing what Jesus commissioned him to do. Jesus told him to go out and to feed the sheep and to take care of the flock. And now he's done that, and we see that in Acts as well. But he's not only doing that, he's writing and commissioning other people. He isn't just accepting the call and going to do what Jesus says, but he's giving it to other people. He's equipping other disciples. He's going and making disciples, and that is also what we're called to do. We're not just called to take our calling and be like, well, I'm going to do this, but I hope nothing comes out of it. But it goes back back in the first couple chapters of Genesis. We're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. We're supposed to multiply the message. And so think about this. Peter had denied Jesus. He had completely rejected that he knew him. But yet, just imagine that relief when he found that forgiveness and knew that his story wasn't over. So if you're in here today and you've denied Jesus, or if you've had a rough past, or even if you just try to compare yourself, your story isn't over. Jesus is always asking for you to receive his forgiveness. He wants to forgive you because your story isn't over. And if you're willing, he's not done working with you. He's not done with you. And so Jesus forgave Peter and called him to feed his sheep. But then he didn't just forgive him, but he challenged him. So who today do we need to forgive and then maybe in turn go serve? So Jesus is asking you today, do you love me? If you do, then feed my sheep. So what does that look like for us here at FPC, as a church, as a community, as a family of families, and what does that also look like to you? In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, will you pray with me?